Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Nice day.
I haven't been. So I'll have to drop off a dog, but I'll take your word for it for now.
Yeah. Gus is on a work call, so he'll join whenever.
Sure. Um, did you want to start with any questions or like reviewing the videos, or do you want to wait for Gus for that?
Yeah, maybe for reviewing the videos, we could wait for him. I think we're
Sure.
both like struggling with very similar problems on the walk. So, um, I guess more general questions are, so I know we're doing like the 6 weeks plus 2 virtual.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to do more,
Yeah.
should we talk about that today or whatever? Or
Yeah, I mean, so what are you looking, what's the grand goal?
yeah, I mean, if it were possible to have him walking with us off leash, I think that would
Oh,
be
sure.
nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I feel like we do have some of the behavioral stuff in home.
Sure.
We've had like some issues with him occasionally peeing in the house too, so that we wanted to talk to you about. So
When is it happening?
um,
Hi, guys.
Hey.
so I would say, or I was talking about him peeing in the house sometimes.
Yeah.
It's sometimes like 3 hours after we've last been outside and he's
Okay.
last gone to the bathroom. If we're not watching him, he'll wander off like down a hallway and occasionally like try to go into your office. We keep that door closed all the time now, but it seems like it's not the length of time that he should be able to wait between going to the bathroom, but he's
Right.
never asks to go out. We tried to like bell train him for a little while and he would occasionally ask to go out.
Okay.
But he doesn't reliably do that. He doesn't like scratch at the back door or whine or anything. There aren't like obvious cues to us he needs to go. So we just I think we've been taking him out more frequently, or we keep him in close quarters and watch him.
Okay. How old is Gus? Not Gus. How old is Finn?
She doesn't know that she has that problem yet. That's oh, when you get into 80, 90 years old.
How old is Finn?
Say that again.
How old is Finn?
Oh, how old is he?
Yeah.
2.5, almost.
Okay.
In the fall.
How long have you had him for?
6 months.
6 months. Okay. And how often do these mistakes happen? I know you said like it's like every 3 hours, but like over the course of a week.
Right. Maybe once to twice a week. We had gotten it more under control for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't happen for probably easily 3 weeks. And then started it up again.
What did you do during that time?
Great question.
Was it more frequent outings? Was it less water?
We've never done anything with the water.
Okay.
Maybe more frequent outings, or we had like put up like one of us will keep him in the room with us.
Sure.
That we're in, so that he can't like sneak off and do it, because anytime we've ever seen it, we interrupt it right away and take him out. So
he's neutered, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Does he visit the same spots?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's your office, Gus?
It's my office, which there's a door to, and then we found it on the rug off the kitchen a couple times. That's the spot that he'll go to as well if my office door is closed.
Is your place carpeted entirely, or is it wood flooring and carpet in some rooms?
The office is wood, and the area off the kitchen is carpeted. Most of our floors are wood, but we have carpets in like the main areas, except for my office.
When he pees in your office, what is he peeing on?
A corner of a bed.
He's peeing on the corner of a bed, which is like aluminum frame, and then also right across from that is like the base of a wooden like side table.
Okay. So this kind of sounds like marking.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's not usually a lot of
Yeah.
urine.
It's not a ton.
when you clean it up, is it yellow or light yellow or clear?
It's yellow. It's
It's yellow.
pretty.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to marking behavior, there's one, I always go back to basics when it comes to potty training as one thing. And either prevention or correcting when you see him actively doing the behavior. So you can't correct him after he's done it. Like you can't bring him back, make it, put his nose in it. Like he's not going to connect those things. Okay. However, if you see him actively peeing on something, you absolutely can't correct at that moment. Okay. So when so we'll review potty basics real quick. One thing is I don't teach dogs ever to ring a bell to let owners know they got to go potty, because for one, it's the dog telling you what to do technically. Two, especially with puppies, they learn that the bell doesn't necessarily mean potty. It means go outside, right? And I've seen puppies, and people have told me stories of their puppies ringing the bell, going outside, fake peeing, and running around. Like legit would go lift up their leg, pretending to pee, and then play. Okay. So yeah,
Before he would do that.
excuse me?
I've seen him do it too. He like
Yeah.
knelt down one time. I could tell he didn't pee. And came back in and wanted a treat.
Yeah. I mean, they catch on to things, right? So
Yeah.
that's one thing. But the other thing is, if we are like actively trying to train a dog to go to the bathroom, you're actually going to put them on a schedule so they learn to hold it as opposed to going when they need to go. So for like humans, we have bathrooms where we live and where we work that it's easy for us to just get up, go over there, and come back, no problem. Whereas his bathroom's outside, right? So it's really putting him on a schedule where he goes in the morning, typically, you know, so if, like if you're working 9 to 5, before work, after work, before bed is the general potty break outing schedule for most families. So if his bladder schedule is what you would say 3 hours, we want to actually teach him to hold it for longer.
Right.
And that can potentially help the marking behavior if it's coming from a potty based area, because it could be just he's targeting kind of favorite spots, if you will. So if we get him potty trained where he learns to hold it, ideally we shouldn't be seeing that. But on the other end of it, you would be correcting him for these things as well. Okay. So do you guys have a kennel for him?
Mm-hmm.
You do? Do you
Great.
use it at all?
We use it whenever we leave the house. We don't usually, I mean, he goes in there sometimes to sleep when we're here, but we typically don't, we've never like created him when we're home.
Okay. So the way this would work is if we know Finn is good, I was going to say Gus again. If Finn is good, no offense if I say your name, Gus. If we know Finn is good for at least 3 hours, right, before you start to see these behaviors, at that 2.5, 3 hour mark, I pick him up and pop him in the kennel for an hour.
Okay.
Okay. So you're pushing it to 4 hours. Then you'd let him out, take him outside to go potty, back inside, and reset your clock. So then, you know, if you do that at 8 o'clock, at 11 o'clock, he'd be kenneled. At 12 o'clock, you'd let him out, and then you'd reset. So the next time he goes back in the kennel is 3 o'clock. Then he's in there till 4 o'clock. Then you take him out to go potty, and then you reset again. Okay. And since he's 2.5 years old, you can push this faster. I'd probably go extending each week half an hour. Okay. So for this week, for 7 days, you're putting him on a 4 hour schedule. And then after that's done, you're bumping him to a 4.5 hour schedule. Okay. And what we should start to see is that time frame, like instead of being able to hold it for 3 hours, he starts to be able to hold it for 3.5 to 4 hours. Does that make sense? And as you're kind of expanding that time frame, you're teaching the bladder to go at a certain time. And so dogs are really habitual. So once you get them on this kind of clockwork schedule, his body will just start to acclimate, and you should get that kind of routine going until eventually you have them on the standard of a 3 outing day is what's pretty typical for most people. If you find once you hit like maybe the 6 hour mark and you find he's struggling and he's having a hard time, how do you say, holding it for 5 to 5.5 hours, I keep it there at that kind of time frame until eventually he's able to hold it for longer, and then I go to the next half an hour extension. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I do with puppies, and it works really well for them. In your case, because you're progressing faster, because he's technically capable of holding it for that long. He's just, maybe he's not been trained to hold it for that long when he's loose and has, how do you say, freedom?
Mm-hmm.
You know, did you have a question?
Mm-mm.
No?
So I guess, so is the crate preferable to then like blocking him off in a room with us because is it teaching something different than the alternative? If that makes sense.
I mean, I guess technically they're both the same, except if he were to pee in the kennel, it would be a deterrent because dogs don't want to pee and poop where they eat and sleep. However, if he's in a room with you, and maybe from experience you've not seen that, but you get distracted one day, and one day he has to go, and he sneaks off, he has plenty of space within that room to pee, and it's not going to be gross because he has so much space away from it.
Right.
Okay. So I actually don't have a problem with it unless you were to start to see that happen. I always just go to the crate because I feel like it makes it pretty concrete, but you know, you could try that out as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely less work because even when he's in the room with us, if it's getting towards that time, we're kind of like watching him a lot. So
yeah, and you want to just how do you say, act as if the dog is going to just make the mistake, because especially with puppies, everybody thinks that they got hawk eyes until they turn around the corner and then there's a pile of poop right there, you know. So the crate just makes it easy. And plus, if there is an accident, I want it to always be a learning experience and them soiling their kennel. So like, let's say for instance, you know, you put him in at 3 o'clock and he's going to be let out at 4, and he does happen to pee the kennel at like 3:30. He might bark and whine and tell you like, hey, let me out, this is gross. I don't let him out, not until 4 o'clock. So then he goes, man, like, you know, I peed in here and I had to sit next to it for another half an hour. That's gross. I'm going to be more incentivized to hold it the next time I'm in here. And that's actually what helps the potty training. Chances are he's going to be perfectly fine in the kennel considering his age, but just trying to take it, you know, get leverage whenever you can. And that's one way to do it.
okay.
So I would put him on a 4-hour schedule, do it for 7 days, bump it half an hour, 7 days, bump it half an hour, 7 days. And if you find there's like a kind of a breaking point, then you want to kind of hover around that area for a couple of weeks before progressing to the next half an hour.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then when he is loose, if you see any suspicious behavior, like let's say he's hanging out with you and he starts to walk over towards where like Gus's office is or something like that, I would just assume he's looking for a place to potty, pick him up and pop him in the kennel, even if it's only 2 hours in. Okay. And then he would spend 2 hours in the kennel until the next outing time. And then I would take him out to go potty and then back inside again. And then real quick, when you do take him out to potty, watch his stream when he pees. If it looks clear and ends clear or light yellow, chances are he still has more pee to go. Okay. When dogs hit the end of their bladder, it gets you know, yellow, dark yellow in color. Once you see that, then it's like, okay, you should be pretty empty. We can go back inside again.
Okay.
Yeah, even though we've never restricted water, he can drink as much as he wants. His pee is almost always yellow to dark yellow. So I don't know if he's just like a generally dehydrated dog or whatever, but yeah,
Dogs are pretty good about taking in only what they need.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, the only time I see dogs ingesting more water is when they're dehydrated due to their food, which if that was the case, you'd be seeing clear urine. So I don't think it's your food or anything like that. I think it's just potty training or marking issues. And then the other thing would be if you see what looks like to be he's about to pee on something, um, uh, like it's already about to happen. You can correct there, and we'll kind of just take a quick tangent before we cover like the videos you sent me. Is you could technically use your e-collar for a correction, but in the home, a lot of people, they don't have a use for it really. So instead, what I do is what's called a bonker. Have we talked about this at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a bonker is just a rolled up towel, and then you use a rubber band or a hairband, a couple of them, to keep its shape. Okay, so it's a firm but soft surface. And I typically recommend that people make a few of them, at least 3, maybe 5. And as the word bonker, you use it to bonk the dog. Okay, so with the e-collar, it's the physicality of it, the discomfort that either deters behaviors we don't want and gets us the more reliable obedience, right? But it's also useful for stopping other things that we don't want to see, right? So the bonker is yet another aversive, okay, a different form that you can use, and this is one that a lot of people use within the home. And it can be used, for barking at the door, barking out the window. If you were to catch them just about to mark, you can use it for that. Jumping, whining, like anything you want the dog to stop doing, you can use this aversive for. Okay, you wouldn't use it as a means to reinforce a behavior like sitting. So if he said sit and he doesn't do it, like you wouldn't bonk him. Okay, it's meant to stop things. And I'll send you 3 videos. One shows you how to make one is how to use one, and the other is a trainer actively using a bonker. Okay, now when he uses it with a considerable amount of force in correcting a puppy. Okay, and I show this video to people to give them an idea, because typically when it comes to physical corrections coming from you, we tend to hold back because you're thinking, I don't want to hurt my dog, right? But if we go to how dogs correct each other, which is nipping and biting, it's essentially like the human adaptation of recreating that behavior. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So like going back, I was spanked, it hurt, but my mom's intention wasn't to hurt me. It's the same concept here. It's a rolled up towel. It's not going to kill them, right? But it's meant to deter things that you don't want to see again. So anything in the home, because I think you had mentioned about like barking in the home. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So you would use this tool, okay? So like, let's say you're sitting on the couch and he runs over to the door and he starts to bark. You could simply just throw it and whack him with it, okay? So then he thinks, crap, every time I charge the door to bark at it, this thing comes out of nowhere. I don't like it. What happens if I don't bark at the door? Nothing. Oh, so if I don't want this thing to come at me, I don't bark at the door. All right. Like it's that simple. Okay. So I always suggest people make a list of things that they want to stop, and then they can just use the bonker. So this way it's very clear cut of like, okay, these are the things that we want to stop, and it's going to be consistent. Otherwise, sometimes they kind of think like, can I correct this with the bonker or can I not? And then chances are you can. Okay. Don't be deterred if he yips, or if he looks startled, if he looks a bit more nervous. That's just a stress response, remember? So discipline is a stressor. I let them recover, because if you try to console him or coddle him, you negate the correction, and then he goes, well, you don't even mean it. Okay. I'm always very indifferent, and you want to do these corrections the moment you see the behavior about to happen or as it's just starting. A lot of people will, for instance, when the dog charges the door, will say no and hope that the dog doesn't bark at the door so that they don't have to correct them. And then it becomes this like never-ending circle of having to say no, waiting, and the dog barking before the correction happens. The moment I see the behavior, I'm already correcting. Okay, because you want him to not even think about making that decision. Like I don't think about running a red light because I don't want to get a red light ticket. There's going to be a camera there, right? Same thing for the dog. You're the red light camera. When he charges towards the door, except instead of a ticket, he's getting a towel. Okay. Questions about that?
I don't think so. I've had one fleeting one, but I forgot it. Never mind.
If it comes to you, just cut me off.
Okay.
Yeah, and when you see the videos, it'll make it very kind of clear cut, like, oh, okay, this is how it's used. And when you do physical corrections, we are doing it appropriate to the behavior, right? So I usually scale things 1 to 10 when it comes to physical corrections. So like, let's say barking at the door, it's annoying, but like, he's not going to hurt anybody. He's not going to hurt a dog, right? There's the barrier there that I would think, okay, this is like a level 2 to 3 behavior. So I'm going to correct them to level 3 to 4 correction, right? Logically speaking. But for Finn, maybe barking at the door is worth that 3 to 4 correction. And he really needs a 7 to 8 correction. Logically speaking, you're thinking it's not appropriate or it's not necessary, but for him it is. Does that make sense? So a lot of times, the reason why I say that is because we're logical and we evaluate things, people keep doing the appropriate correction, but they say the dog keeps doing it. I'm like, yeah, because even though logically it seems appropriate, the dog needs more in order to make it not worthwhile for them to perform the behavior. Okay. But I always start off with what looks appropriate to you. And then it should be just like with anything else, just a steady decline of that behavior. If it feels static or if it feels like it's not changing, then he needs more intensity. Okay. And then I always start off with that intensity. I don't warm him up using weaker corrections, building to that.
Okay.
Questions?
No, I was imagining scenarios, but I think we'll try it, and then if questions come up, we'll ask.
Yeah, it's pretty simple once you see it. And some dog, like every dog has a weakness. Some dogs are more kind of susceptible to a prong collar than they are e-collar. Others more e-collar than prong collar. Like someone could like jerk as hard as they can with the prong, dog is unfazed. But they put them on the e-collar and 10 to 15, the dog's perfectly behaved. So the bonker is just like another tool in your box that allows you to address things. So anything indoors, you can use that approach and it should be fine.
Okay.
Okay. Other things that you want to cover, the reactivity stuff?
Yeah, I think it's mostly the walking. And then I guess like trying to understand how we're getting into those tighter spaces of having him stay de-escalated during, like right now we're still like, I wouldn't put him on a tight sidewalk next to another dog at this stage. But I also think our walk needs to get cleaned up before we do any of that.
So your walk actually looks pretty good.
Okay.
Okay. So the videos, I saw them, so thanks for sending those. Looked better. The one with you on the sidewalk or the path looked better than the one on the grass, right? The one on the grass made sense because now there's like this field of distraction that it's going to just draw his nose. So I really don't hold it against them. I look at what's more realistic, which is you're going to be on a sidewalk most of the time, right? And when it comes to walking on the grass, the way I would look at it is he actually did a fairly good job. It's what I would expect. And it can be tightened up. So for dogs, I go by the dog. Like, so my guys, they're all off leash trained. And if I walk into a field, they'll stay on my hip, they'll stay in position, but their nose will be on the ground, right? And I've let it go because they will stay there. They're able to do both, right? Other dogs, they'll nose will hit the ground and then they'll start to deter and go off track off the owner's hip. So those dogs, I go, they can't have it because they can't do both things, right? So, and say with Finn, let's say his reactivity is just, you're making progress and progress. But when you walk in the grass, you see this kind of minor behavior. Then I go, well, it's either, if you want it really strict, you can absolutely have it really strict. Or if he's able to hold the position and keep that nose on the ground and kind of like enjoy his scent or so and have good behavior with the reactivity, then I personally don't care. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where I would want to end up. I think we're just getting into the different mindsets of like, if we're on a path and we're doing heel, we both know that we want him tight. For me, and I don't know how you feel, but like if we're in a field, as long as he's in our bubble and reasonably close and not like wandering off or backwards, then I'm fine with it. So like we're learning to kind of like change the correction factor for us in terms of frequency for like that. And I mean, I would be fine with that, you know?
Yeah, I think he's, at least when we're walking him, he's never, I feel like he's always like really parallel with our leg. Like he seems like he's like right about where he's always about to cross over. And then he's doing a lot of like stopping and starting to self-adjust.
Sure.
So to me, it would be this more like fluid motion if he were a little bit behind. And then recently he's also been sort of like tapping me like the side of my leg with his nose. I'm not sure if that's when he's more escalate. I think it is when he's sort of like responding to more things in the environment and is getting nervous. And if that's a variation of when he used to like nip my leg, or if it's like trying to check in.
I mean, he does do it when he's escalated, but he also did it. He does it when he's not too. Just to like, he's like, just like, I'm here. He's like, it's almost a version of looking at you or checking in, I think. Because like, we've seen that a couple times when he definitely didn't see a dog yet, and he's really tight on our leg and he's just like touching with his nose.
Yeah. When I was going to say, it can be, if the dog is super tight, you've created a paranoia, right? So that little kind of touching is the brain wanting to forge, but knowing there's a correction coming, and the head turn to just kind of stay on the body is how I would describe that. Because I've seen it before. The dog wants to go, but it knows something's going to happen. So they keep kind of just coming in, thinking that the hit's going to happen. Does that make sense? So it's not a bad thing. You know, especially with the nervous dog, this may take a bit before it kind of just goes away. And then you get the nice balance of he's on your hip, but not overly paranoid. But it's not a bad thing. Okay. It means it's registering, but he still will, like, there's the thought process of like wanting to forge a bit is still there. Okay.
Yeah. This probably segues into the next topic that Liz was saying. She remembered you saying that like the dog can learn basically like the rules of the walk and kind of like cheat the game, where it's like he's really just figured out that sometimes we feel lately that like he's just figured out that he can't get out too far in front, and so he just kind of like he'll slow down and speed up, as opposed to like knowing that we want him on our hip, and we feel like he's kind of learned those to cheat it a little bit, and we're like, like how do we correct that, because it's so small, the nuance.
Or it seems like mentally still very escalated a lot of the time. Like his breath is pretty huffy, his back hair is a little spiked. He won't necessarily get out in front always and make that mistake even when we give him more slack, but he's just sort of, the head's looking around everywhere constantly, and it just seems like he's like his old self in a more contained body.
Sure. So there's two things here. One would be in the video, you were turning and tapping, correct? Is I flip it and I tap, then turn.
Tap and then turn. Okay.
Right. So what some dogs can learn is, you know, when the owner is moving, that they'll move. Like dogs are very quick to see something and they'll just shift right away. And they're like, hey, I made it. You can't tap me, right? And I go, yeah, I can. Let me flip it now. Beat this, right? Now there's no, because you moving is technically a warning cue for him, because there's a shift.
I see his language change, and then I'm almost like, well, he's onto it. It's almost the pointless to tap, because I'm not really correcting something. I'm like reaffirming that, I don't know, it's a little late.
Yeah. So it's technically, again, logically speaking, an unfair move, but that's how we fix these little nuanced things is I would tap, then turn. Because then it's like, hey, like now there's no warning movement. It's just don't even think about getting ahead, but we do have to do the turn to give them something to attach to always. So I would do that. The next thing would be, what's his number been still?
Usually 5 for walking stuff.
Okay. I'd start dabbling with like 6 and 7.
Okay.
The numbers may shift depending on what you're doing. So like, let's say, which might get a little bit tedious, but like, let's say you're doing a correctional turn to stop the forging, and then you find 7 is working, right? But then he forgets to sit. I'd have to go down to like 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. Okay, because then the 7 might be too much power for such a passive behavior.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I want to be a step ahead, and just like when you're coming to that stop, you're already kind of adjusting. And then when you start moving again, you bump it back up. Okay. If you start to see them accept the higher level corrections, like kind of more smoothly and not giving that overreaction like we saw that first class, then you're fine with staying around that range. But I think that's also another thing that can be partially why he's still forging a little bit. And then we see how that ends up affecting his stimulation levels and like the hackles and all that stuff you were describing.
And then recently he's also been sort of like leaning into us on the walk, or his head is crossing over my legs sometimes. Like I've kicked him a little bit in the head accidentally. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering how to kind of like pull him off of being almost in front of me.
Really, it's the either crossover turn where you're cutting into his space.
Okay.
Led with the right leg, because he's on the right side, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So then when you do your crossover turn, instead of turning out with the left, you would turn with the right.
Okay.
You're wanting, like when you said, like I kind of kicked him out the way, you're actually wanting to do that to balance things out. Okay. You can't. So the remote is telling Finn to move into you, right? So it's kind of confusing to get him to like think to move away from you. Right. So I use the body for that stuff. Okay. So
you would use the leg.
Correct. So if you're walking and you start to see him cut in front of you, you would make that left turn led with your right leg. So you're pushing right into the head. And what you'll most likely see is him jump back like, what the crap? And then he's going to think, okay, there's such a thing as too close. And then he starts to balance off.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions?
No, so it's slightly higher numbers. Like, I guess when he's overstimulated by the environment, like maybe we've seen a dog recently and then he's kind of on alert about everything. Are we ever correcting for like the huffy breathing if it just seems kind of generalized, or is it still like you tap for things on the walk itself and hope that sort of brings him back in?
Address it directly.
Okay.
Yeah, you can address it directly if you find like because it kind of sounds like, because the theory is that the leash walking would like just resolve these issues, right? And it's done a percentage of work, but there's still like this kind of like lingering stuff. What I would do is if I see like the hackles up, I might pick up my pace a little bit and give a tap at a higher number to give them something to move towards too. Like I'm forcing an issue technically, right? Or you just keep your walking, you see the hackles up, you give a tap on 7 and he takes the hit and you just look down at him and see what happens. Do you see the hackles go down? Do they go down halfway? If it's only halfway, give him another tap, bring it down all the way. But you're just continuing like nothing's happening, okay? So you can either try shifting things a tiny bit to force an issue, to give a reason for tapping, or I just continue with what I'm doing remote so that he learns to distinguish like, okay, that wasn't because I did anything wrong with obedience. It's because I was still tensed up from the dog I saw 15 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And you would do this immediately, right? So if you saw something happen and he were to escalate, and once you address the situation and you're moving forward, if 5 seconds later, those hackles are still up, I'm remoting at that point.
Okay. And
Okay.
that will cognitively register that that's what he's getting tapped for.
Dogs can learn to differentiate. So for an example, let's say a dog is laying down, they're in under command laying down, and they bark. And I tap the dog for the barking. In the beginning, the dog will most likely get up and move away, okay, because they don't know what the tap was for. I continue tapping, bring the dog back until they go back into position, right? And then I stop. And then something else triggers the dog to bark again. They'll bark. I tap them for the barking. They get up. I correct them. I lead them back, right? After so many reps, the dog will bark and I'll tap them and they'll kind of look around, not get up, and lay down and shut up. But it takes correcting the behavior, and if they go off, so like let's say you correct them for the hackles and he goes off your leg to the side, I then counter him and I keep him under pressure to bring him back in. So he goes, oh, you know, I thought I got tapped because I was too close, so I spaced off, but then it kept happening and I came back in. What else was different? And so then he has to become more self-aware, and then the hackles, like it's not as exaggerated as a bark, but it's technically the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. So if you tap them and you feel like it's confusing them, that's why you have to just keep doing what you're doing and bring them back. But you want to keep that pressure on. So he goes, okay, it wasn't moving away from him that fixed the issue. So the next, you know, after a few reps, when you tap him for hackles, he learns not to space off. He learns to keep still, but then he registers, oh, my hackles are up, and they go down. Kind of like when you would step into him during the stay command. Remember how he pivoted off?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to bring him in and repeated that a few times, and eventually he would walk off and walk back in and he wouldn't move. It's kind of, it's like that, like he was able to differentiate. It just took mistakes and repetitions before he was able to clarify, like, oh, don't move when they move back in. Okay.
Okay.
Questions?
No.
Does this make sense though?
When we talk about it here, that out there, I don't know.
You know, and the stuff that you're dealing with, it's not uncommon, right? Especially when you work with the small dog. I just started working with a Yorkie who's like half the size of Finn. So I told him, like, you know, it's gonna be a little tricky, and he had some similar issues because they were so big that he was like so tentative around them. But we had to, you know, force him with collar to keep on the hip or whatever. Look like a dancing chicken over here with me waving my arms around. But yeah, so with the forging, I did see progress in the video you sent me where you did the one correction, and I think even noted it yourself, like, oh, that was better, right? It was very clear. So as you start to tweak things, either with the tap then turn, or with bumping from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, you should start to see, like, oh yeah, like I haven't had to turn for 5 blocks when typically it's once a block. Mm-hmm. You know, it should be a considerable amount of change. And it might be one or the other, or it might be both working together. You know, and that's what just, how do you say, the practice will come in. Okay. When you talked about closing the gap, right? In your setting, because I know you say you don't walk down Sheridan because it's close quarters and there's people that come out of their residences, right? So where are you working with Finn? Is it like at a park setting?
Yeah, a lot of it's the park that's right by our apartment, but our sidewalk is like, you know, a fence all the way along one side, and then there's like a little bit of sidewalk, and then like garden planters that are fenced in. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what that width is, but a lot of times when we'll see dogs coming, we'll sort of step down a sidewalk that's going into the street to create more space, so that we're not like 5 feet away from a dog.
That's like, that's like, it takes us like a minute to get out of that situation and into the park where we like to work with them more. Mm-hmm. We basically do like a potty, and then we'll heel. A lot of times we'll just go in the middle of the street because we have more room,
Mm-hmm.
It's just nicer to be out there when there's both of us, because if there's three of us or even two of us on the little sidewalk, there's barely enough room to do a turn, much less like if another dog's coming. We're not to that point yet. So we basically get out of our block off like sidewalk, street,
Mm-hmm.
or sorry, sidewalk, street, sidewalk. And then we go into the park where there's like a beach on one side, and then there's an elevated grassy area with like a bench, long like cement benches. And that's where we typically can work with them. Or there's like wide park ways, not unlike Oz Park, that have like a wider 10-foot or something walkway, and we work with them there too.
Okay. So another thing that you can do if you don't have the space to like do a turn is you can actually reverse, right? So if you're walking with Finn and he gets ahead, you would tap and just reverse, and you would keep reversing until he turns around and starts walking towards you. And then I move forward and you'll see him pivot in and catch and like kind of latch onto your leg. So that's something that I've had some of my clients do if they don't have the space to turn, or if they like live downtown in the South Loop, whatever. Just be careful if no one's behind you. Just walk backwards into them. But that's something I think that can help make that tighter quarter a little bit easier for you. Because if you're walking side by side and you got to turn, and you know Liz or Gus is in that turning way, it's going to be problematic. So I think that'll help with that. When it comes to closing the gap, there's a couple of things you can do. One, you could incorporate the gentle leader, because that's what he was on before, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the gentle leader is there for immediate control when things go south. So if I'm not walking down Sheridan and I go, I'm not too comfortable because in case something happens, like I don't have that control over the muzzle, right? But if you have the gentle leader and you're on Sheridan and the dog comes out and then he just becomes reactive, well, as soon as you pull up on that leash, you're going to control the mouth, right? So you prevent any kind of interaction from happening. And I can still use the remote and then suppress him. But with the flat collar, like he could technically kind of do this and still kind of pull ahead. So the gentle leader would give you that immediate leverage should someone just come out the door, and you need to have immediate control over him. Okay. So like you're trying to balance out giving the slack, but then being prepared for, you know, real life moments when things are unplanned. Okay.
Yeah. And do you think it makes sense to prioritize like getting him to a place where he's walking while another dog is walking in the opposite direction from more width, or having him seated doing that in a tighter space?
Yeah, seated is easier and harder. It's easier for you as a handler because it's very clear. You just need to keep your butt down right next to me, right? For the dog, it's harder because now he has to contain himself as the stressor is passing. Okay, and I actually saw a couple of videos recently of trainers talking about, you know, when reactivity, that you don't make the dog sit because it's harder for the dog. I'm like, well, if it's harder for the dog and I can get them to adapt to that and accept that, then walking past should be easier, right? And I've done this with all my cases where I'm like, it's the easiest for the owner to have them stationary because it's very controlled context. When you're moving, it's tricky because if he lunges full on as you're moving, he just lunges across into reactivity, you know, obedience correction would be turn to redirect him, when really it's I stay stationary, I let the reactivity happen, and I crank that number and get him to run his little butt back. So then he goes, crap, like you let me do what I wanted to do and it didn't work out very well, right? But it's harder for the dog owner to do that because there's a little bit of technical skill involved, plus the emotional aspect of like, oh my God, my dog's blowing up and lunging at another dog, right? So the stepping aside, I believe it's harder and easier for you, harder for him. Okay. And then once you get that down packed, then you can start progressing to the walking past dogs. Walking past dogs, when you're able to give more space, at this point, I would think it shouldn't be a problem. So like that 10-foot pathway you talked about, I don't think that would be a problem. However, I would still step aside because it's essentially the same thing you would do in close quarters. So you're keeping it very consistent, you know, in terms of his behavior and the context that he's having with dogs. The difference only is just the space between him and the stressor.
And then as we decrease that proximity to other dogs, if he's seated and we're asking him to stay mellow as the dog passes by, it seems like there's going to be eventually situations where that dog is on a long leash and like comes over to have an interaction with him. Mm-hmm. Or are we always paying attention to how long that leash is and moving him further away if they could potentially be in? I guess I'm wondering, what is our expectation for his behavior if a dog were to like come up to him?
Right. So if a dog were to come within, I want to say, 1 foot to 2 feet of Finn, I would expect there to be an explosion, right? Doesn't mean it's acceptable, okay? Doesn't mean you can't address it. But I would, like, let's say you do this and you're noticing like a lot of progress, but then one day he blows up and the first thing I would ask you is like, well, tell me what happened. You say a dog was on a flexi leash pulling towards him at 2 feet. I'll go, yeah, I would expect that. It's in the line of progress, right? For you as a handler, since you're stationary, it allows you to watch Finn, but then using your peripheral vision to see what's going on in the environment as well, right? So I have no problem when I see someone with a dog on a flexi leash, not under control, or looking like they're trying to greet my dog. I will tell them, no, we're training. Please keep your dog or shorten your leash, or like, please keep your dog on a shortened leash or whatever, right? More often than not, when you say the words, we're training right now, 98% of the time, people respect that. And they go, oh, they shorten their leash, they bring their dog in, and then they walk past, right? Every now and then, I come across a client who's had not that experience, okay? And that's where, if it doesn't look like it's like, I address it right away. Like people tend to wait till it's already here. If I see it half a block away and it's getting close and they're still 10 to 15 feet away and I can just give direction there, that's when I give it, right? So they have plenty of time to address it. If I need to repeat, I have time to repeat. And if I need to remove the dog from the situation, I still have time for that as well. And I always just say, go with your gut, go with how you feel in the moment, because unfortunately life isn't concrete. So if it just doesn't look wise, then cross the street. If the other dog is reactive and it looks like the owner doesn't know what they're doing, I have no problem crossing the street, because yes, we have the behavioral component wanting to make progress, but at the same time, you don't want to put yourself in a situation that may be potentially dangerous, which it happens. Mm-hmm. You know, I've had people's dogs be charged by off-leash dogs. I've had people have their dogs attacked by an off-leash dog. You know, and I will confront the problem before the problem is even there, because I've seen the other side of these stories. Most people don't want to be confrontational because they don't want to be mean. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be mean either, but it's that or stopping a potential dog fight or preventing one. So.
Yeah, I think we need to get a little bit more verbal with there's a lot of off-leash dogs in the neighborhood, and yesterday one was like friendly, but you know, immediately started running up to us. And I guess my reaction is, I mean, we weren't on a path, we were on the beach. And so, you know, my reaction is to kind of like flee with him. Mm-hmm. But a friendly dog wants to like continue to follow, and the owner was very far away. Mm-hmm. I mean, it stayed, I kind of like held him up. I guess I tapped. It's like happens quickly and it's hard to remember because you're kind of freaking out. But yeah, maybe it's a matter of trying to like tell those people more in advance to keep their dog distant from us.
Right. So if we look at the setting, right? So like, let's say you're on the sidewalk, or even like at Oz Park, there shouldn't be off-leash dogs, right? It's against the law. It's not a dog park, right? But people do it. I go in and I understand the situation. I'm comfortable because I have no problem. Like you see us, we're there, we go, I start approaching the dogs and all that stuff. Right? I have no problem with it. And I've been yelled at by dog owners. I don't care. So one thing would be if you're like, let's say at the beach, we're expecting that even though there shouldn't be off-leash dogs, that there may be off-leash dogs, right? So I kind of go in with that mentality of like, okay, I want to go to the beach too with Finn, but at the same time, I understand I may have to address people. And you can tell them like there's off-leash laws and they're going to argue with you, right? So what I do here is even though the dog is friendly, the moment you see the dog lock on, hey, and they start moving towards you, I look directly at the dog and I'll step towards them and hey, loud clap too if you can to startle them, okay? And this usually gets the owner's attention too. So then they're like kind of like, what the hell was that? Okay, so you're like barking at the dog before Finn barks at the dog, okay? And I keep, so when it's a friendly dog, because there's no intention really, a lot of times it'll startle them and like kind of like give them this kind of what the hell was that about? And I just slowly start to walk away, but keeping the front of my body facing the dog. So I don't even worry about obedience at that moment. Okay, I just worry about removing myself from the situation. And if I have to like walk past the dog, you'll see me pivot and I'll even walk backwards while I'm facing the dog. Because forward is confrontation and you've already put out threat. You've said, hey, right? Like don't come any closer. So by keeping that forward body language, the dog goes, okay, like you just shouted at me and you're not removing confrontational body language. What happens if I move forward again and then I step in again and I shout? And the dog goes back, goes, oh, you're not a friendly. I go, no, I'm not. And typically they'll leave you away alone, but you want to do this as soon as you see it, okay? Same thing even if the dog looks threatening. If a dog is charging, barking, and looks threatening, they're so stuck on the threat that they're not thinking you're going to give it back and you'll catch them off guard. Okay, I've done this with Mastiffs, I've done this with German Shepherds, I've done this with Pit Bulls, I've done this with a pack of Chihuahuas. You know, they came barking at me and I had a lady with 3 Shih Tzus on a sidewalk off leash, you know, yeah, on a sidewalk. She was all 3 Shih Tzus. And they came charging at me, barking. And I went for the loudest one because that's the leader. Okay, so then the next thing is if I shout at them and they don't back off, you have to think potential, right? If an off-leash dog came in contact with Finn, in his world, that would technically be a validated bite if he chose to do so. Because he's perceiving threat, right? He doesn't care if the dog's friendly or not. So he lives in the bit or be bitten world. So with the lady with the Shih Tzus, I shouted and the Shih Tzu kept coming. So I punted the Shih Tzu right in the chest and I sent him back a few feet and I kept walking. And the lady was just startled and like looked at her dogs and looked at me. And I was like, you shouldn't have 3 off-leash Shih Tzus on a public sidewalk. And also Cermak, this wasn't a neighborhood sidewalk. And even then, this shouldn't have been off leash, right? Kept walking. I had 5 dogs walking with me that day. And one of them was an aggressive pit bull and he didn't do a thing, right? However, had I held back, I had 5 dogs, 3 off-leash Shih Tzus, it would have not been a pretty scenario, right? And I've had clients, I had one client in particular who's been, her dog has been attacked by an off-leash dog 3 times. Mm. And, you know, and she's like, Jesse, what do I do? I'm like, when you see the dog, shout at them. If that doesn't work, be prepared to kick them and kick them with intent. You're not going to kill them, but you've already seen what's happened 3 times to your dog, mm-hmm. You know, and then the people don't care a lot of times. It's unfortunate. People will take their dogs to the dog park. The dog will attack another dog. They'll take their dog and leave and not even acknowledge the dog that was attacked. You can Google it, right? So I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm gonna avoid a situation of a dog fight, mm-hmm. Right? And for Finn, it actually relates to him because if the dog's charging and you step in, because he sees this all happening, right? and you address it and you get the dog to run off in response, he goes, oh, I really don't have to worry about being defensive because mom will take care of it. Okay, this has nothing to do with intelligence. So if you go to a country where you don't understand the language and you see a fight break out and you see what looks like to be authorities come in and remove those people, you can kind of deduce like there was a disagreement, it escalated, and then the authorities came and took them and probably took them to jail without even understanding a word that they said, right? It's the same thing for the dog. When they see something happening and they see you step in, they see that the situation was addressed, it makes them feel better.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, because right now I feel like I'm communicating to him to an extent that like you don't have to be on guard, but then if an off-leash dog comes at us and I'm just forcing him to, like, we're both kind of turning away and leaving, you still feel pretty vulnerable to that dog kind of coming at you.
Correct.
Or out, and he does.
And then for him, like he's back like, hey, no, we have to address this. Like,
right.
and then you're trying, and there's some situations where I would say, again, go with your gut, that will be the best decision, right? But when you go into flight mode for the other dog, you're showing weakness, and then they go, I gotcha. You see that? Because if you're already running away from them, they're already, the confidence goes up in whatever their intent was. You know, so a lot of times when people are bitten, they're bitten because they're moving away. I don't move away. I move in. I'm going to make that dog back off. Okay. If it's a Rottweiler, I might run. But, you know, so you want to think about those things as well. And the other thing would be, like, let's say an off-leash dog comes in, you don't see it, and unfortunately things go south and it's a dog fight. Okay. I don't try to pull back Finn. I let the leash go. I let him defend himself. Okay. My personal opinion. And I start addressing the attacking dog by kicking them until they give up the fight, because you guys were just walking, minding your own business. That dog came out of nowhere and attacked your dog, right? So logically, that makes sense. Now, if it's reverse and my dog were to do something, then I would be addressing my dog. I'm very black and white. I'm very fair. If my dog gets out of line, I give them consequence. If your dog gets out of line, I'm going to give them a consequence. You know, we live in the world where we kind of look to the authorities to do that. But when it comes to dogs and dog fights and the damage that can be done within a short period of time, I'm not waiting for a cop. Okay. And you would be safe, actually, because according to off-leash laws in Chicago, and I always suggest people double check, is that if Finn is on a leash and a dog charges off leash, and Finn bites that dog, you would not be held liable because your dog is on leash. Okay. If you're in your own yard and Finn is off leash and someone were to come in and he were to bite that person, like by them reaching in or even just stepping in your yard, even though it's your property, you're held liable because he was off leash, just as FYI. Okay. Bit of a tangent there, but this conversation usually ends, I usually have this conversation with everybody because off-leash dogs in Chicago and my dog is friendly. You know, it's bound to happen at some point. I hope it doesn't, but don't be afraid to confront it.
Yeah, it's good advice. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Huh. Oh, I guess about Sunday, are we still confirmed to do the introducing him training?
Yeah, I think with the healing stuff, you have a good chunk done. It's really just fine tuning things.
Okay.
And if you feel like you have a good grasp on the understanding of it, excuse me, you know, we'll just tweak things as we go along. You know, it's not out the ordinary because he is a nervous dog. You had reactivity issues and he's small. Okay, so that for me makes sense in terms of what you're dealing with. And I like the idea of introducing another dog because it gives us controlled context to close that gap. If things go south, now you have a controlled moment where I can coach you through how to settle him down, how to handle him, which would then be applicable in real life, because then you have a foundation to kind of jump from.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to that Sunday. We're actually, the next weekend, we're going camping with that group. I'm not assuming that will be to a point where we can bring them, because that other dog, they're definitely going to bring their dog, but it'll be just nice to introduce them. I think moving forward, they're going to be spending time together if we can make that happen, so it'll be good. Do they need to bring anything different, or just their dog and a leash?
Just their dog in a leash, preferably not in a harness. You know, it's just a regular collar. If they have a training collar, like a slip chain or something, that'd be great. The reason why, unless the dog is super chill, the harness can, like trying to control a dog with a harness can be a bit difficult. I've done it, but if I need to, but it just gives more immediate control if it's on at least some kind of collar.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
All right. Well, if you need anything, you know where to reach me. And then I love the videos. They help out a lot. So feel free to take any of those if you have any other questions about stuff that you're having issues with. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time.
No worries. We'll see you on Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Enjoy getting outside.
Bye-bye.
Bye.